Welcome to Movies Recap channel. In the opening scene we are shown a pregnant woman who is urgently taken to the hospital during a rainstorm to give birth. Later the doctor informs her husband Greg that she tragically passed away during childbirth. He also reveals that their baby has Aubain isn't a genetic condition causing lack of pigmentation. Greg is then taken to see the baby who is undergoing a brainwave time. Yes, unfortunately upon seeing the pale baby he becomes so overwhelmed with grief that he rejects the child as his own. The story then cuts to 2 decades later where Sheriff Dog and his team are investigating the recent death of an elderly man at a farmhouse. They determined that the man died from a heart attack that may be an albino though. During their search the house they stumble upon an underground and basement where they find a boy and hiding. Despite their efforts to coax him out he refuses, suspecting that he is scared. Doug calls upon a child services psychologist named Jessie Caldwell for assistance. She arrived shortly after and immediately heads to the basement where she finds the boy hiding in a dark corner. Through Jess's encouragement the boy eventually comes into the light, revealing his illuminous white skin. His actual name is Jeremy Red, but he is nicknamed Powder due to his bright skin tone. It is revealed that Powder has never stepped outside the house, so who gave him the nickname? After a while Jessie asks Powder why he didn't contact the police when his grandfather passed away. In response the poor boy explains that his grandfather warned him that he could be taken away if anyone saw him, so he always stayed away from other people for education. Is built up a small library and memorized all the books there. Powder claims that he can recite each and every paragraph of all the books he owns. Hearing this Jessie picks a challenging book typically intended for college students and asks him for a specific page number. To her amazement Powder recites the first paragraph or that page without any errors. Afterward Powder accompanies Jessie out of the basement and she takes him to a boys' hostel because he is now under the care of the state. Upon their arrival the other boys are captivated by Powder's appearances. They've never seen someone like him before. Later that night while Powder is having dinner at the hostel a gang of bullies approaches the leader John and demands that Powder wear a spoon on his nose. In a surprising turn of events Powder takes the spoon from John's hand and begins to manipulate it. He makes it stand upright on the table and effortlessly draws other spoons towards it. This astonishes all the boys present there and they assume that Powder is some kind of freak or maybe one of his books I was about magnets. On the other hand Doug returns home after work and finds his son Steve at the door. Their strained relationship is evident as they pass each other without exchanging a single word. It appears that Steve came to check on his ailing mother Emma, who is confined to a bed due to cancer. The caretaker informs Dog that seeing their son has brought Emma a sense of healing far beyond what any painkillers could provide. A few days later Powder enrolls in high school to attend a physics class. During the class Professor Ripley demonstrates an apparatus called Jacob's ladder which generates an electric current. As the machine is turned on Powder starts feeling uneasy and begins to shake. Suddenly the machine overloads and discharges a powerful bolt of light Trinity directly into Powder's chest. Less causes him to levitate in the air, horrifying all the students present in the class. Donnelly frantically trying to switch the machine off but to no avail, so he destroys it with a chair, finally bringing an end to the chaos. In the aftermath all the students rush out of the classroom while Powder lies unconscious on the floor, worried that he has passed away. Donald approaches him and touches his body. Surprisingly, the professor experiences an odd sensation which raises his arm's hair and plunges him into a kind of altered state. In the next scene Powder is hurriedly taken to the hospital, where Donald describes the incident to the doctor. However the latter doesn't believe it is a strong electrical shock like that would have typically killed the boy or at least left some burn marks. Donald tries to convince the doctor by explaining that Powder's body constantly undergoes a process called electrolysis, which is the reason why he lacks body hair. As to continue discussing a nurse interrupts them and reveals the Powder has escaped from the hospital. Apparently he jumped through the window when no one was around. Meanwhile Powder is walking along the street when he comes across one of his classmates, Lindsay. They engage in a brief conversation while being observed by a curious neighbor. Powder looks back at the neighbor and informs Lindsay that he can hear their inner thoughts. However she believes that he is simply hallucinating due to the electric shock. Following SP Otter continues his journey back to his grandparents' house. However he is eventually captured by Dog and his co-worker Duncan, who ask him to get into the car. Returning to the school, Powder is led to a conference room to discuss his exceptional intellect. The principal visits in personally and reveals that his IQ test results have come out. Turns out Powder's IQ is over 300, which is far more than that of the most elegant person in the world. The principal announces that he has a unique and extraordinary individual. However, Powder shows no interest in such matters, and simply requests to be allowed to return home. And fortunately for him, Jesse reveals that he can no longer go back home since the house now belongs to the back. In the next scene, the high school students accompanied by Dog and Down Good embark on a camping trip. In the words that evening, while the students gather around a bonfire, Powder sits by himself. Seeing this, Dog approaches him and to begin talking at the same time as thunderstorm begins, and Powder mentions that he can sense the storm within himself. He expresses that when he sees lightning he feels a magnetic pull towards it, and when he hears thunder he shit his pants. Powder causes grandmother telling him it's God. Although he doesn't believe it, he also reveals that his mother was struck by lightning while pregnant with him, which appears to be the reason for his special condition. The next morning, as Powder's wandering in the woods, he's approached by the bullies John and Match. With that any reason John points is gone, and Powder saying that he can kill him right then and there. However, before he can pull the trigger, a gunshot is heard in the distance, diverting everyone's attention. They rush in that direction and discover the Duncan is shot a deer. Powder's deeply affected by the sight, as she can empathetically sense the pain and fear of dying deer. What the hell does that have to do with lightning? When he cannot take it anymore, he grabs Duncan wrist with one of his hands while placing the other on the deer's neck. Surprisingly, Powder transfers the deer's sensations of pain and fear to Duncan, causing the latter to converse violently. As the effect intensifies, Johnny and his gun up Powder, demanding that he release the officer. However, our protagonist simply stares in the eye and continues torturing Duncan. Enraged, John pulls the trigger, but Mitch intervenes in the nick of time, raising the gun and ultimately saving Powder's life. In the aftermath of these events, Powder is brought back to Jesse, who questions him about what transpired. She's genuinely worried about his well-being and state of mind. However, Powder ignores all their questions and states that he wants to return home. When she keeps on insisting, he becomes angry and unintentionally unleashes his powers, causing glasses as well as the lights to shatter. He then walks away confidently, stating that Jesse won't be able to keep him there for long. Meanwhile, Dog returns home and meets with the family doctor, who updates him on his wife's worsening condition and the immense pain she is enduring. Other Dog doesn't comprehend why she chooses to hold on. He believes there must be a reason. The doctor informs him that he will never know the reason because Dog's wife is completely unable to communicate. The next day, Powder is sitting alone in the dining room when Donald approaches, and the professor reveals that he felt a distinct energy within himself when he touched Powder during the earlier incident in class. He describes the energy as immensely powerful, making her I feel youthful again. He also talks about Einstein's theory, which states that if a person uses 100% of their brain, they can do unimaginable things. Perhaps Powder is able to do just that, which explains his incredible powers. Donald that expresses his desire to be friends with Powder said that he can gain more information about I'm scared. Boy's a bit hesitant at first, but he eventually agrees. On the other hand, Dog visits Duncan place and notices that he has removed all firearms from his home. Despite being a diehard fan of hunting, when asked about the reason, Duncan becomes emotional and shares his experience of feeling the deer's pain when Powder transferred it to him. He describes it as an extremely distressing sensation, as if he himself was on the verge of death. Duncan admits that he had been so traumatized by the event that he can no longer bear to hold a gun. Hearing all this, Dog realizes that Powder has extraordinary abilities, and this gives him an idea. He decides to take the boy's help in communicating with his terminally ill wife using telepathy. Later, Doug brings Powder to his home and introduces him to his ailing wife, Emma. Gently touching her forehead, Powder delves into her mind, relaying her thoughts to the sheriff through Powder's telepathic connection. Dog learns that his wife is holding on to life because she doesn't want to pass away without wearing her wedding ring and without reconciling with their estranged son Steve. She reminds Doug of a cherished memory from Steve's childhood when they played together in the snow and she lie on. He believes there must be a reason. The doctor informs him that he will never know the reason because Dog's wife is completely unable to communicate. The next day, Powder is sitting alone in the dining room when Donald approaches, and the professor reveals that he felt a distinct energy within himself when he touched Powder during the earlier incident in class. He describes the energy as immensely powerful, making her I feel youthful again. He also talks about Einstein's theory, which states that if a person uses 100% of their brain, they can do unimaginable things. Perhaps Powder is able to do just that, which explains his incredible powers. Donald that expresses his desire to be friends with Powder said that he can gain more information about I'm scared. Boy's a bit hesitant at first, but he eventually agrees. On the other hand, Dog visits Duncan place and notices that he has removed all firearms from his home. Despite being a diehard fan of hunting, when asked about the reason, Duncan becomes emotional and shares his experience of feeling the deer's pain when Powder transferred it to him. He describes it as an extremely distressing sensation, as if he himself was on the verge of death. Duncan admits that he had been so traumatized by the event that he can no longer bear to hold a gun. Hearing all this, Dog realizes that Powder has extraordinary abilities, and this gives him an idea. He decides to take the boy's help in communicating with his terminally ill wife using telepathy. Later, Doug brings Powder to his home and introduces him to his ailing wife, Emma. Gently touching her forehead, Powder delves into her mind, relaying her thoughts to the sheriff through Powder's telepathic connection. Dog learns that his wife is holding on to life because she doesn't want to pass away without wearing her wedding ring and without reconciling with their estranged son Steve. She reminds Doug of a cherished memory from Steve's childhood, when they played together in the snow, and she lies. And becomes evident that John's stepfather had once seized the hat which had belonged to his late biological father and subjected him to this same taunting that he is currently inflicting on Powder. Unfortunately, this only enrages John even more, and he decides to take action. Suddenly, rain begins to pour and John forcibly drags Powder outside. He humiliates the poor boy by stripping him naked and pushing him into the muddy water to add color to his pale skin, and unable to endure any further humiliation, Powder unleashes a powerful electromagnetic pulse in a spiritual shape, sending all the bullies flying. After a brief moment, everyone regains their composure except for John. Concerned Much checks on him and discovers that his heart stopped beating. He is actually on the verge of death. Realizing what he has done, Powder's filled with instant regret, so he quickly springs into action and starts administering CPR on the bully using his powers. Fortunately, the procedure works and John is resuscitated back to life. This impresses all the bullies, especially Match, and so he decides to help him out. He assists Powder in secretly boarding a vehicle that is heading towards his grandfather's farm, allowing him to escape without further trouble. Unfortunately, when Powder arrives home, he discovers that all his belongings have been seized by the back. Shortly after, Jessie comes to him, offering solace and assuring him that she will find a better place where he will be accepted and understood and liked. Now Donald joins them as well, and as they prepare to leave, they encounter Dog and Duncan outside. Jessie requests Doug for support, urging him to let the boy go. Surprisingly, the officer agrees. Powder has helped him reconcile with his long-lost son. At that moment, a thunderstorm erupts and Powder starts running into the field, with everyone trailing behind. Suddenly, a lightning bolt strikes him, eventually engulfing him in a blinding flash of light. The movie concludes as the clouds unleash one last resounding thunderous roar. Thanks for watching.